And that brings me then now to the live panel discussion, where we're going to be exploring this further, as well as the maturation pathways for our species. So I will first introduce our next speakers, Pavel Luksha and Kees van der Pijl. Yes, great to see you here both. I will introduce you first, Pavel. And Pavel is a systems scientist, a change catalyst, and facilitator. He's the founder of the Global Education Futures and the School of Evolutionary Leadership, and co-founder of the Weaving Lab, as well as the Learning Planet and Living Cities Earth movement, and an author of numerous books and publications. His chapter in The Great Upshift is Ascending to the Age of Planetary Consciousness. Pavel, I'm really delighted that you could make it live with us, and that your Wi-Fi is holding up. I'll briefly go now to Kees van der Pijl, retired as a professor of international relations from the University of Sussex in the United Kingdom. He's the author of numerous books as well, including The Making of an Atlantic Ruling Class, most recently States of Emergency, Keeping the Global Population in Check. I think that's going to be really important. And his chapter in The Great Upshift is Revolution from the Ground Up. So this is going to be, I trust, a very enlightening conversation. And to both Pavel and to Kees, I would like to ask you the following question, and to see if you can answer that combined with a brief summary of the key points from your chapter of the book. Now, at the start of the session, we touched briefly that our species appears to be at the forefront of a new developmental stage. If our task now here is to create and to map and to become the path forward, or the upshift path, as we've been exploring through this summit and in the book, what would you then see as some of the key challenges, as well as the unique opportunities of this particular developmental stage where we are now for our species maturation? So, Pavel, I'd love to begin with you first, and then followed by Kees.
Yes, thank you. Really excited to manage to join you. What I would like to say is, first of all, I'm really delighted that this book is being launched. And I think it's a really important volume that will contribute to the conversation about what are their practical pathways into the transition. And what I sensed was one of the key notions that I would also like to make was just made by Charles Eisenstein in his talk about the fact that we are facing not one, but two possible pathways. Because if we read many conversations that discuss the possible pathways, they present a dilemma between an upshift and a collapse of our civilization. Charles has mentioned that there is a possibility of a third path, which is a path of control, which is the attempt to perpetuate the existing order by new means. And I agree with him that in the long run, this path is it's delusional to hope that we can control the complexity of this reality with all its diversity, with all its beings, visible and invisible, so to say, and hope that human mind will rule over all of them. So it's delusional, but it's very present. And it's very present in the design of our systems, in the design of our policies, in the design of our economic systems. And if we think the way modern society with its capitalistic markets, increased surveillance states expands, it actually expands in the direction of that potential scenario. So we have to recognize that it is a shadow of the evolutionary transition that we encounter, and we should not shy away, so to say. We should not think that the upshift is guaranteed. So that's one thing I want to say. The other thing I feel that it's important to say is like really the difference is between when we deal with this upshift is we have to recognize that it's only possible if we start to connect ourselves with larger than human systems and recognize that we are part of this larger superorganism of the planet Earth, which, as some, Gaia, the hypothesis of Gaia by James Lovelock has been there for 50 years. More recently, Adam Frank has introduced the idea of Gaia and other planets as super intelligent beings. So if we think it from the perspective of amount of information that is being processed, is like far too superior to anything that human civilization can hope to create, whether it's artificial intelligence or artificial intelligence that exponentially grows for the next 100 years, it's still minuscule compared to what Gaia itself is, the mind of Gaia, so to say, is processing. So we should not see, let's say, this attempt to control the reality, I think, is futile, but we should find ways to get into conversation, into alliance, into alignment. And the alignment actually requires us, and that's what I talk about in my chapter, it requires us to begin recognizing what it means to be planetary species, what it means to cultivate planetary consciousness, and what it means from the practical standpoint. What does it mean for us as beings to live as planetary species, members of planetary species on a daily basis? What are the routines we need to exhibit? What are the mindsets we need to cultivate? What are the relationships we need to embrace? And this is therefore becomes the responsibility of every member of the planetary species. So each of us 8 billion humans in our evolutionary transition, which probably is also part of the evolutionary transition of Gaia itself, needs to ascend to that role. And of course, that also implies that the ascent is not only individual, but it's also collective, because consciousness is being held by collective structures, by institutions, by rules, by systems of communication. This is where political work and economic design steps in, but it has to come from the perspective of us being planetary species, members of the planetary family and cosmic family. And if we start looking from this perspective, we need to see that our structures need to become planet aligned. So they should not be extractive in the interest of our species or some members of the species, but regenerative in the interest of all the planet, life embracing, evolution embracing. David mentioned this notion by Janine Benyus that life creates conditions conducive to life. So how can we create human structures that are creating conditions conducive to life and to consciousness? And if we manage to do that, we step into the age of thrivability, which actually expands the human story for the next tens of thousands or millions of years ahead of us as part of the great cosmic evolution. So I think that this idea that we're at the end of human story, as many people present as a story of collapse, or just extended a little bit further with the idea of control, both are dead ends, but we really need to step up into the upshift, which implies that we learn to become the future ancestors and learn to become the new form on this planet and part of the next stage of Gaia's evolution.
Thank you, Pavel. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. Kees, I would love to hear from you your thoughts on this topic, but also some summary of your beautiful essay.
I very much agree with what Pavel just said. It's very deep, but it's also very abstract, like the other introductions, which were also inspiring, but formulated at a very general level of abstraction. And I think we have to realize that we are in the midst of chaotic, terroristic events like the genocide in Gaza, like what I call postmodern fascism, that individual people who are considered dangerous, like Julian Assange, are picked out and just removed from public life. That's for one. The other side, so to speak, is not watching helplessly at the good intentions that people like us, if I may speak for the others as well, are formulating. And I think one particular characteristic of capitalism is that it's progressive counter-revolution. That means that it's not just reaction, like the Tsar's regime in pre-revolutionary Russia, that you just try to kill everything that moves and etc. Capitalism has a progressive answer to anything that is endangering it in the longer run. And I would say that everything that I've heard this evening so far, I could only step in the second day because I have a throat, a cold that can make me explode into a wild coughing. But what I've heard today, I know the answer of capitalism already, and that is transhumanism. That's also a great upshift. Thomas Legrand mentioned Harari, but Harari is the transhumanistic specialist advisor to Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. So you have to be very, very careful, not to ignore views like that. On the contrary, we have to study them very closely. But transhumanism is also trying to insert humanity into a sort of Gaia story, a wider planetary story, but then under the control of those in control of the IT revolution. And the IT revolution is really what determines our whole epoch. And it is really a very unsettling question. Which forces in society today will be able to turn the possibilities contained in the IT revolution for a democratic turn of events? Because I'm sure that what Pavel was referring to in terms of, inserting our own evolution into Gaias and Gaias into the rest of the planetary system, were democratically inspired and not part of a transhumanistic agenda. But if you look into transhumanism a bit more closely, you see that, for instance, the very worrying trend that I see in our own society, and I've heard of neighboring countries, it's exactly the same, is that, for instance, the sexualization of children at school, at ages where in my time we wouldn't even have thought of what we were talking about, is part of the transgender movement, which has nothing to do with the emancipation of people who suffer from certain things that make life more difficult for them. No, it's an active movement fostered by a group of identifiable billionaires who want to create new types of humanity. And it's a stepping stone for the transhumanism agenda. So I would say capitalism has always generated counter-revolutionary developments against anything that came up from society, but with a progressive slant, so that many people could think, wow, this is a new thing. So the counter-revolution, for instance, against industrial unrest was not just shooting at the workers, although it included that as well, but also reorganizing the production processes so that workers might begin to dream of having their own car. Now, it's that sort of progressive counter-revolution that we now see that make me respond to Pavel's very insightful talk just now in terms of transhumanism as a progressive counter-revolution. A very confusing and contradictory term, of course, but I hope you see what I mean. Maybe I should just shut up for the moment now.
I think this is very, very valuable what you're saying. And touches also back to what some of the earlier speakers were warning about is be careful. What do we mean here with progress? In which direction? Don't fall asleep. Yeah. And I think that's really important. Of course, even the word the upshift itself, it sounds very nice. And so it's very easy to speak a lot of those values, but we have to be very careful what are the hidden agendas behind that. Of course, now with the movement also of artificial intelligence, and if we are progressing quickly to AGI,
exactly.
That's a whole other question as well, where we can see, of course, within AI itself, it has an incredible bias. So if we're using that to speed up our innovations, but we are not revealing the hidden agendas behind that, I think a lot of the common people have no idea even how to have a say in that. And so I think this is very important, because in this session what we want to explore more deeply is, on the one hand, mapping this path forward, and what do we mean with forward here, and the other hand, if the paths are being mapped and created by a species with developmental disorders, so perhaps on the one hand we may say on a species level we might be at the maturation of not even a teenager, but then a teenager with developmental disorders, all kinds of disorders, learning disorders. We're not learning from the pain we're causing. Eating disorders, we're over consuming, and so forth. So what I'd love to go deeper in that, to hear both of your reflections on that, and perhaps from that awareness, first of all, awareness that, where are we at? What do you see then as the key actions to get us into a wiser, more aware direction? So, Pavel, let me start with you first, and then Kees.
Well, I have to refer to two more publications that came out this year. One of them was a report by me and a group of colleagues called Transition to Peaceful Futures, where we try to explore how can we create conditions for a peace-based civilization on our planet. What was surprising to me, actually, when we did this very comprehensive work with more than 100 experts from more than 40 countries throughout this and previous year, of course, triggered by a number of military conflicts that were very concerning, we saw that it actually is also a transition in terms of how we organize our economies, how we break monopolies that dominate our society, how we move from extractive to regenerative and relocalized models of production of food, energy, and other essential resources for our population. How do we do it? By also removing harm to other beings more than human nature. How do we restore democracy? How do we bring the voice of let's say, those who are voiceless at the moment, including, for example, younger generations or indigenous people that are not interested in military conflicts, largely? How do we heal intergenerational traumas? And these are very practical things. These are practical things. There's lots of tools and approaches. One of the things that actually inspires me about the future of humanity is that the majority of solutions are already here. We already know how to make the transition. The problem is actually in so to say, breaking the consensus that there is no other way but to increase the control, so to say. There are other ways. There is a way of distributed, decentralized, movement-based approaches that are also using, let's say, new models of finance, new models of decision-making, leverage power of communities. And they are all known. They are tested approaches. They are not theories anymore. And it goes back to the idea that, Kees, you mentioned. And thank you for triggering this. Let's say, let's get to this conversation more practice-oriented. It's all about the idea of bringing power back to people, so to say. And more than people. And I think part of that democratization in the 21st century has to acknowledge that we are not the only ones on the planet. That the decisive power should not rest only with humans. It has to we have to also find ways to govern complex systems with the inclusion of modern human voices. And I don't want to talk so much about the polycrisis that we are facing, but I think we are in this polycrisis, or some call it meta-crisis. And I think the analysis of that has been in so many done in so many books and other sources and discussions that we don't need to go there. We really need to look beyond that and say that yes, the transition is possible. Yes, we collectively can discover it. And maybe the last thing I want to say is that even though solutions are here, it's not about implementing one-size-fits-all solutions. It's actually about recognizing that how nature works itself. It doesn't go with one-size-fits-all solution. It goes with incredible diversity of approaches that grow into this localized biosynosis all over the planet that are fine-tuned to local circumstances. And that's what we humans need to learn, how to grow our bioregional anthropo and biosynosis, so reconnecting with planet, learning to live together with local circumstances, but also growing into a kind of biosphere meeting human sphere, anthroposphere, and the noosphere. I really like this idea that Teilhard de Chardin brought into at the age of his end of his life about pneumatosphere, the sphere of spirit. That is the next stage of evolution that is possible, which actually involves all beings on the planet. So that's a little bit far beyond, but like I think the journey starts with transforming models of economy, transforming models of governance and our institutions, the way we learn. That's one of my subjects. The way we learn as communities to learn the things that are relevant to our future, rather than learn things that may continue to keep us in the dream state and not really doing things we need to.
When we had the COVID lockdowns here in the Netherlands, I was a speaker in many illegal meetings, and one of the things that struck me was that at all these meetings, and I'm talking about 20, 30 events, mostly in the more, not in the big cities, but in the marginal areas of the country, the areas where we now have the farmers' revolt here in the Netherlands. It's the same in other countries as well. And I was struck there by a number of things, but one of them was that very many people were growing their own food. So the idea that we have to relate differently to nature, that is not through the supermarket, but by going into a field and beginning to harvest something that we want to eat, was already being put in practice. And when I inquired a little bit into the backgrounds of that, it turned out that there were even people living in the margin of the country who had moved from the big city to that area simply because in the big city, of course, there's no space for growing your own food. And then my sense, and that is what is in my brief piece in the Uplift book, was that there is already a sort of cultural revolution going on, especially among the young, usually the better trained young, let's say the people with advanced who don't have to worry so much about their material situation, but who can begin to think about how do I want to live. And that's no longer that they want to get as rich as possible, but they want to live a more harmonious and life, which is not just about growing your own food, but also being in a mental state which is sustainable, and so on. The other thing that struck me at these meetings, and which I've also worked into the chapter a little bit, is the quest for a spiritual side of that endeavor. That is why, let us say 5 years ago, I would have felt very uneasy with the initial talks, your own, with due respect, and I would have felt it as very otherworldly and not about the material fights that we're in the midst of. And now I know that this quest for, in the absence of religion, for most people, this quest for some transcendental normative framework in which all this happens and in which we have to make our decisions and think about ourselves and about our future is simply part of the reality that we're facing. So there's no matter of whether I approve or disapprove. That's not important at all. It is there. And that means it is better to begin to look at which approaches in that respect are most profound and have the greatest survival chances. Again, as I say, that can never remain at a fairly abstract level, because the forces that we are fighting against are so extremely well organized. Everything that I've written, my whole expertise, for whatever it's worth, is about how the ruling class is organized. And I'm not revealing any secret when I tell you it's very well organized. They're not very smart individually. I met him when I was a professor at Sussex and went to many other places. I was never very impressed with their individual smartness, but they were with 100, where I and my friends were with 3. And that means that they, in combination, were able to come up with integrated systems of thought, which were then automatically fed into student classes. Next generation was being trained in the, sometimes in my view, very poor explanatory schemes, but yet their work was made part of the education systems, whereas mine was occasionally mentioned as an oddball outside interference with what was really necessary. And, so let's not, when I say capitalism is progressive counter-revolution, let's not underrate the people who are actually managing this mechanism. I wonder if they would ever call it with the terms that I'm using here. But if there is something that I term progressive counter-revolution here, it's being managed by people who are very well organized and are with very many. My hope for the regenerative potential of this quest for bodily integrity, for healthy living, for making sure that you're not a big bag of whatever, but you're in a healthy state and fit, was also fed because in the COVID movement, I worked on this book, which in other languages is not called States of Emergency, but Pandemic of Fear. But that title already existed in many forms in the English market. And in the last chapter of the Pandemic of Fear was that the IT revolution should be used as a means of democratizing society, etc., etc. And then the book has just also been translated into Italian, and the Italian translator, Dr. Daniela Danna, said to me, "Can I write an introduction to it? Because you are too technocratic in placing all your hope in an IT system for democratic use, where it's more important to see that what is missing is the human dimension and the dimension that you represented in your own introduction, that Thomas represented, etc." So that's what I wanted to say. That's how I got to this idea. Humanity is being attacked with the COVID lockdowns on something that is at the beginning of modernity. The habeas corpus, the right to your own body, and by implication the right to your own mindset, and its revolutionary response, so to speak, its authentic, spontaneous response is to withdraw partially, and then to come back with your own food, your better health, people are no longer so eager to run to the doctor after what they've seen that hospitals and doctors, etc., and the medical authorities did in the COVID crisis. So in that sense, the counter-revolution here has provoked its own revolutionary thrust, which will be very difficult to subdue, because I only see people, well, not only walking behind their telephone, but also with the bottle of clean water, with, watching what they eat. I've said that now.
Thank you. And that's actually a hopeful message, which you just now shared, because it shows there's also a deeper intelligence within us, that as we are facing and confronted with these forces that are seeking very much to stop that transformation, that we can use it in a way that catalyzes our transformation.
Yeah.
So that we can only do that if we are aware of that. Interestingly enough, I was in the Netherlands during the lockdown, and I got locked down in the Netherlands because I live in Mauritius and I couldn't get home. It took me 7 months before there were any flights to return me to my children. So I remember very much the discussions there, but also the narrative to declare the war on the virus. That was everywhere, as if it's something that we fear, but a virus is also
the war on drugs.
Exactly. Yes. And instead of understanding, a virus is also a mutation. And it's always been very, very important to catalyze the next stages of our evolutionary development. So that's also another way of how are we working with threats, and can we look deeper?